Let's leave adrenochrome for now and segue into another dark aspect of American life, and that is Disney. So you were an illustrator for Disney, huh?
Animator.
Animator,
Yeah,
sorry.
I did specifically, without getting into like all the different qualifiers, I did digital animation for Disney, a lot of it being in Maya, After Effects, and then ultimately writing lots of custom nerdy scripts that would automatically do all kinds of parallax animation. And I won't bore you with the fine details, but essentially digital animator.
That's wild. What was it like? I mean, you were there for how long?
10 years.
Wow.
It was, yeah, 2006 to 2016.
Wow.
I loved it. I gotta say, right off the bat, it was underpaid because Disney knows how much of a privilege it is to just have their name on your resume and to work with
Right.
some of the IP you get
That's
to work with.
bullshit.
Yeah, that
And
sucks though.
in exchange, they just don't pay you a whole lot of money in order to do that. But
Damn.
I loved all 10 years of that. I got to go and jump onto the rock and roller coaster at lunch if I was like feeling a little bit sleepy.
That's awesome.
Could just hop into the park. Like
What?
the park
wild.
was literally like less than a 3-minute walk from my desk once I got out of the office.
Wow. That's wild. Were you a Disney fan prior?
Not really, no. In fact, I thought most Disney adults were creepy and still
Well,
kind
they
of
are.
are.
Oh, they are. Yeah,
Although
that's true.
I'm not against roller coasters and rides,
Yeah.
but no, I would definitely not consider myself a Disney enthusiast. Even while I was working there, I got to work tangentially on some Monsters Inc. like Monster University stuff and Cars
Love
stuff.
that.
And I didn't even watch those movies when they were out,
Funny.
even though I was kind of working on them in ways. I felt it was like too juvenile for me at
That's
the time.
funny. I'm not a Disney adult, but I do like Mary Poppins. I always like the ingenuity behind Mary Poppins, and like I don't know much about Walt. I mean, I know some things, but I always just like the what went into that movie and the way he thought about the animatronic bird that sings and stuff, and it's just really interesting stuff. And just I like that overall story. You know,
I
some
see her
people-
as a villain, by the way, Mary
That's funny.
Poppins.
You do.
If you rewatch that movie,
She's an
right
angel.
after she shows these kids this completely different reality, right? Where
Yep.
2D and 3D mesh, and you can talk to cartoon animals, and she brings them back. And as soon as she brings them back, she immediately starts gaslighting them. They start talking about, wow, that was so fun, Mary Poppins. It's so crazy that we got to go and dance with penguins. And she starts saying, what are you guys talking about? That didn't happen. None of that happened. I can't get over that. Is one of the most insidious characters
That's hilarious.
in Disney
I
history
see her.
because of that.
I see her as an angel who came back to help a broken family and teach the children imagination, and then heal the family with because the father was this banker who had a horrible job with a horrible boss, and the reward at the end of that movie is the family coming back together despite him not having a job anymore. And then he gets his job back, and it's like a little extra happiness, but the family unit is happy together. I always like that. Whereas the remake they did a few years ago was like totally horrible and evil, and it was like it was inverted happiness. Him getting his job back was the true happiness, and then he gets his family back. I'm like, I hate that, but I like that take though. I hear
We
that
could
a
debate
lot.
that a little bit, just because even in the original Mary Poppins, this is the family outsourcing compassion and care for their own children to
Yeah.
the hired help, and
Yeah.
and they don't even do a background check on the hired help to know that she literally came in on a flying broom.
Yeah, I mean, everyone in the beginning of that story, except I mean the kids too, are bad characters.
Well, you could say the magic kind of, washed over their brains, right?
Maybe, yeah. Gaslit,
MK Ultra,
gaslit
yeah.
by
Exactly.
magic.
And
But like,
the neighbor is some kind of like an imperialist sort of adventurer that mentions that he's going out looking for Hottentots. Like it's a
amazing.
very
Well,
controversial
it's
movie in
British, isn't it,
2025.
though?
yeah, it's amazing. He's got a cannon on his roof.
Yeah.
He's constantly like fighting some invisible enemy. He's the symbol of the decline of the British Empire. And the mom is like a caricature of a suffragette. Like she's clearly a bad mom because of her bad ideology. It's kind of making fun of the suffragette movement and through that
100%.
character.
Yeah, great observation. That's very prominent in the movie if you rewatch it.
Oh yeah, and then she gets a redemption arc in the end. But what you're saying about the kids and their help being outsourced falls in line with the characters being bad in the beginning. And I always like that Poppins brings in like the fun of an imagination, but also structure for the children and how to go back and forth between the two to be in the real world. Whereas there was none of that allowed in their life, in their broken life at home. And then the father kind of goes through his own transformation, understanding what fun is by flying the kite at the end, and then gets like his job back. And it's like happiness, even though it takes like the old man dying, laughing in the air for that to happen. But I always liked that movie. I'm not into a lot of Disney
The
movies.
British have weird humor. Come on.
I love British humor. I love British humor. But Walt wasn't British, right? Was he?
But Mary Poppins is obviously.
No, not at all. He
No.
was, if anything, he
Super.
was a true red-blooded American
Super.
and maybe even Spanish royalty, depending on how far down that
interesting.
rabbit hole you want to go.
So there's so many theories about Disney. Like, do you have, like, when you were there, were you into
Were
the
there
theories
tunnels?
of Disney at all?
I've seen the tunnels, yeah, but I mean, none of the claims that you see online, I don't have anything that can even compete with some of those most claims. Like, I've seen blood come out of those tunnels. I've seen people get really
What?
hurt, but it's less because they were doing rituals, and it's more because they were underpaying a 17-year-old wearing a huge Mickey outfit, and then they have to run from one side of the park to the other side in this dark, like unlit tunnel, and they just run into each other. And there was like horrible things that would happen
Whoa.
in those tunnels,
Whoa.
but not sacrifices. At least not
That you
unless
saw.
you know,
They
unless they're
weren't
paying me to
taking
say that.
kids.
Do you see like occult motifs in Disney films? Like people
A
always.
million%. In fact, I would even make maybe a slightly like out of the norm argument that the earlier Disney movies had the most occultism and they were better for it. And versus the later ones seek to remove a lot of that. For example, the very first feature-length Disney movie is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, topical because they just re-released the live action version of that.
Yep.
But that original story is really Rosicrucianism. It's all about a human exchanging human knowledge and human experience with earth elementals that go into the ground and they scavenge up these minerals or these gems. So it's to them, these gems have no value, but to the humans above ground have all this value. And the only thing that she exchanges is she teaches them to dance and to sing and to clean, which are things that they weren't familiar with. Again, if you're an earth elemental, if you bring it all the way down to like the elemental magic aspect, one of the first things that Snow White does with these seven dwarves is she bathes them. This is their first interaction with another element of water.
Wow.
So
Yeah,
now
yeah.
she's kind of this alchemist that's introducing these new dynamics in these earth elementals that they've never experienced before, and they get addicted to it. And that becomes the entire premise of that entire movie and the rest of the story. And I would even make a really strong argument that Walt, he repopularizes the Grimm's Brothers tales, right?
Yeah.
For a long period of time, their book was only outsold by the Bible. And you could also make a pretty strong argument that you went into someone's house and you see that they've got a Bible and Grimm's fairy tales, more chances that they just have the Bible, because you kind of have to have a Bible in your house for all sorts of reasons, but you might not be reading it every night. If you had kids and Grimm's, you're probably reading that to them constantly, way more than you're reading the Bible, unless you are, very, very religious.
Right.
But just because you own those two books, one would get read more than the other. And without Disney sort of repurposing and repopularizing Grimm's fairy tales, you might not have even had the same momentum for this revival of like Germanic romanticism, like this kind of romantic worldview of Germanic paganism and these old folk stories. They would have died out without Grimm, and even with Grimm, they might have lost a little bit of their traction. And I guess the biggest line to draw here is that we might not have had a World War II if it weren't for Disney popularizing globally this Germanic sort of people's history, and that this kind of gives it this insane amount of momentum that now it creates like a monster almost with how much people are invigorated with these old Germanic tours.
So wait, can you expand on that? Are you saying like that the stuff Disney pumped out was then feeding like the German people's ego?
Absolutely, because the Grimm brothers, before they did Grimm's fairy tales, they were historians. They were writing about
Right.
the actual history of the Germanic peoples, and it was kind of being lost to time. A lot of this information was not known. The Germans had sort of been losing any sort of national identity at that point. And when the Grimm's fairy tales, they actually were going out into the field and trekking through woods and knocking on old ladies' doors and saying, tell us your stories. And they created this huge index of all the most popular stories, and they kind of combined them to get this cohesive collection of them. And that book itself, because it becomes so popular, this reestablishes this Germanic identity nationally. And now when Disney starts to popularize this, now he's bringing it alive on the screen. They're animated. And this is right at the same point in which the German people are going through yet another identity crisis. So I don't know if you can like run a simulation on a world without Disney and how much the Germanic peoples, you know, like identify with this new nationalistic worldview. But with Disney in the picture, he definitely adds a little bit of fuel to that fire. And clearly, I mean, objectively, he draws from Grimm's fairy tales for a lot of his very early movies.
A ton of stuff, yeah. I don't know if this is true or not. I don't know if I dreamt it or if I just misread it, but I'll share it and see if I've heard this story. But allegedly, from my memory, Roy and Walt Disney were flying above Florida looking for the land that would become Disneyland on the day JFK was assassinated. Have you heard that?
I haven't heard that. I mean, that's actually, I love that part of the lore.
I think I read that somewhere. It's been a really long time since I read that, but I got to find that. So I'm just throwing it out there and someone listening can look it up. But it always made sense to me.
Yeah, and the synchromysticism of it all. And actually, that was the building that I worked in Disney was a post-production building. It's called the Roy O. Disney Production Building.
Yeah, because he took over Disney after Walt died, I believe.
Yeah, and Walt kind of lost a little bit of focus because of how many plates that he was keeping spinning in the air for such a long time there.
Yeah, so when it comes to the occult stuff, and you're saying they, I guess, were better at it early on, like what you were saying with Snow White, do you think Walt was just very conscious of this stuff and putting it in there, or were
Definitely.
there other people?
Yeah, without a question in my mind, because Walt Disney... This is another weird, like, conspiracy misinfo thing that gets spread. Like, oh, he was a Freemason. Well, I mean, technically, he wasn't because he was actually DeMolay. He joined the DeMolay when he was about 19 years old.
I don't know what that is.
And so the DeMolay, imagine this is like Freemasonry for kids. Before you're old enough to join the real Freemasons, you can join DeMolay.
Okay.
It's almost the same thing as ROTC is a good one. Another good one would be you join the Cub Scouts before you join the Eagle Scouts or something of that nature. And so he not only is he part of DeMolay, this sort of Freemasonry for kids, but he is raised and mentored by the guy that founded DeMolay, a guy that everyone just called Dad. So this would almost be like, you know, you didn't just learn about mythology and read Joseph Campbell's books. Like Joseph Campbell was your teacher and mentor for 4 or 5 years of your life. So you would have a much different perspective on Joseph Campbell's work if you were dealing with the man himself. So here's Walt Disney being mentored directly by the guy that created the DeMolay organization. And their sort of practices, their rituals are very Freemasonic, but even outside of just Freemasonry, they've got all sorts of occult symbolism and lighting candles. And this candle represents a certain, you know, personification of a thought or an ideology, and being able to talk and be so well versed in symbolism. I feel that that's something that Walt never let escape anything that he touched. I think that his whole thing about story and mythology probably was heavily reinforced by his time in DeMolay. So it's, in my mind, the earlier stuff was him saying, like, here's how I can convey this like deep symbolic meaning that I've had impressed on me through this secret society, but I'm gonna do it in a slightly different way so it's more palatable for the masses.
Is DeMolay still around? Is that a thing?
Absolutely. I think just like every other Freemasonic organization, they've kind of tanked in membership. From the 50s and 60s were like the heyday. This was part of everyone wanting to join clubs anyways. But then after internet and LinkedIn and insurance companies, there's less and less reason to join any of these.
Right.
So it kind of fizzles out in the same proportions.
Wow. So LinkedIn got rid of like Oddfellows.
Pretty much, man.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Yeah, I've been into some Oddfellows buildings as a, you know, with my death metal band, because it was some of the only places that you could play venues in Oddfellow temples, I guess they are. I don't know what they're called.
Which is not Freemasonic, by the way. It's
right.
Sort of like tangential to it. It's if you don't want to join the Freemasons and you still want to do Freemason type stuff, then you can join the Oddfellows.
It was weird. We played a show in one in Burlington, Vermont, and it was like just open to us. We had all our little death metal bands play a show, and at some point, I saw in the wall this like secret door thing, like a square, and I'm like, I'm gonna play with that. So I opened it, and there was just a skeleton inside in a casket with a glass thing, and took a picture of myself giving it some beer. That was a big mistake, because 2 hours later our van exploded, and I just figured the
So
skeleton.
it was obviously
skeleton
those two
did it.
things are
The
connected.
skeleton did
Dude,
it.
obviously.